Hey everyone, I'm Mohammed and this is the morning of September 15th, 2021. Yesterday Laravel 8.61.0 was released and today I'm gonna bring you the latest update and the latest things the Laravel team and community have been working on lately. So without much ado, let's set off. We'll start by some elegant Eloquent improvements. And if you're not familiar with Eloquent, it's the object relationship mapper that ships with Laravel or ORM, and it makes querying databases much easier when you are developing your applications. But sometimes querying related models or related records can be a little bit complicated and can make the code harder to read. In this release, several community contributions were made to make querying related models much easier. Let me show you. Imagine that we have an office booking application and we want to show offices in this application that were reserved by a user before. And to do that, we can simply use the newly added where relationship method. But first, let me explain the environment of this test to you. Here we have 3 offices and another office, a 4th office. This office is the single office that has a reservation. So what we want to do is to query the offices that has a reservation that belongs to this user. So let's implement that. We're going to call office where relation, and the name of the relation is reservations. So we want to query an office that has reservations, and these reservations has user ID equals to this given user that we created in the test. So we will call get and to array to display to bring the results from the database and display it as an array. So if we go to the terminal and run this test, we see that it's returning only a single record, which is record number 4 that we created in the test, because that's the only record that has a reservation that belongs to this user. This neat Eloquent query here translates to a much longer version, which is office where has and then reservations, and then we provide a closure function query and use query where user ID equals user ID, and then we call get and to array. So you can see the difference between the new way of querying relationships and the old way of querying relationships. The new where relation method is more readable and easier to write. And similarly, a new method was added to allow querying polymorphic relationships. Imagine that we have an image model that has a polymorphic relationship with multiple resource models. Like an image can be attached to an office or a review or a blog post, etc. Let's imagine that we want to query all images that belong to a resource that was created before yesterday. And to do that, we are going to use the where morph relation method that was recently added. So we will call image where morph relation and provide the name of the relation. In this case, it's resource. And as the second argument, we should provide the type that we want to query. In our case here, we just want to query all types. So we will provide an asterisk, and then we will add our where condition. In our case, it's created at must be less than now sub day. And then we call get and then to array. Let's DD that and check the results from running the test. And here we go. We can see that the only image that was returned is called old.png. And if we go back to the test, we can see that this image belongs to an office that was created a year ago, while the other image here belongs to an office that was recently created. So this query works. It brings images that belong to a resource that was created before yesterday. And we can also query all images that belong only to an office type. So instead of the asterisk here, we can provide the class name of the related model, like this. And we can also have multiple where conditions by providing an array instead of this. So here we will provide an array, and we can, for example, find images that belong to an office that is published. So it's published equals true and belongs to a user with ID equals something. So this will bring us images that belong to an office type, and this office must be published and belongs to a specific user ID. And speaking of polymorphic relationships, by default Laravel will use the fully qualified class name to store the type of the related model. However, you can customize the type stored by using a Morphmap. First, let me show you what I mean. So here we have an office, and this office has two images. The relationship between the office and the images is a polymorphic relationship. So if we do dd and bring all images from the database, so image all and to array, if we go to the terminal to run this test, we can see the value of the resource type stored inside the images table has the fully qualified class name of the office model. We can change that by providing a Morphmap. And to do that, we are going to go to the app service provider, and under the put method, we will use the relation class and call Morphmap and then provide the map as an array. So in our case here, we want to store the type as office if the type is an office model, so office class. Now if we run this test again, we can see that the resource type was stored as an office. That's neat, but there was this problem when you forget to include a type in the Morphmap, and in this case Laravel is going to use the fully qualified class name of this type. And while there are other records that have an alias, just like we have seen, we added an alias for the office model, so having some records stored with the fully qualified class name and other records stored with an alias can be a little bit confusing when you look at the raw results in the database. And for that reason, Laravel now has a new enforce Morphmap method that will throw an exception if it encounters a type that doesn't have an alias. Let me show you. So let's replace this Morphmap method with the new enforce Morphmap method. Now let's switch this to using a different model. So let's use user instead, and this user. So now while creating images that belong to an office, Laravel won't find an alias for the office model class, so it's going to throw an exception because of this, because we are using this newly added method enforce Morphmap. So let's go back and run the test, and we can see this exception thrown, class morph violation exception. These tricky stuff are really hard to detect, and it's really annoying that you find that your app have this inconsistency in the future while you look at the database records and you find some records with an alias and others with the fully qualified class name. So Laravel protects you from that using the newly added method. Good guy, Laravel. Now let's move to talking about some newly added testing goodies. When using model factories to create fake models while writing tests, the model events will be fired. The Eloquent model events will be fired. And if there are listeners listening to those events and those listeners are manipulating the state of your application, this manipulation can affect the test results. And for that reason, Laravel added a new create quietly method that will allow you to create factories without triggering any model events. Let me show you. So here, when you are creating an office model using the factory and you call the create method, the creating and created model events will be fired. If there are any listeners listening to those events, the listeners will be invoked. And to avoid that, you can use the new create quietly method, and that way no model events will be triggered. And in addition to this new method, Laravel added two new assertion methods that allow you to check if a given model exists or doesn't exist in the database. One of these newly added methods is assert model exists and it accepts an instance of the model, and the other is assert model missing, which will assert that this model doesn't exist in the database anymore. These helper methods will run a new query to the database to find the latest state of the model in the database at the time of running this assertion. That way you don't have to call model refresh or model fresh to get the most recent state of the model from the database. Laravel will do that behind the scenes for you. Now let's move to an update on Laravel Vapor. Laravel Vapor deploys your application to the serverless environment on AWS Lambda. And to be able to do that, it moves all your asset files to Amazon CDN and serves those files from there. Previously, configuring this CDN was a bit complicated, especially when you need to use gzip or Protly for compression. For that reason, AWS provided a set of managed cache policies that you can attach to any distribution, and these policies are highly optimized to serve the kind of assets that you would serve from a web application. Starting now, all newly created Vapor projects will use these optimized cache policies. If you wish to run your application serverlessly, head over to vapor.laravel.com, create your account, and let you focus on building your application while we configure AWS Cloud to work for your advantage. Now let's move to an update on Laravel Forge. And Laravel Forge makes starting and stopping queue workers quite easy. With just a few clicks and you start a worker, and with a single click you stop workers. But when you attempt to stop a worker from the Forge UI, it's very important to ensure that this worker will stop gracefully. Or in other words, it will not stop while in the middle of processing a job. By default, when you stop a worker, supervisor, which is managing the worker processes on your servers, will give the worker process 10 seconds to terminate before it forcibly terminates it. Now, new in Laravel Forge, you can configure those 10 seconds to however much time you think your application needs to finish a job. If you head over to the queue tab under your site settings, and if you to create a new worker, you can now configure the stop wait seconds option. This option will instruct supervisor to wait for this amount of time before stopping a worker. And now you can have some peace of mind knowing that stopping workers will not damage any of your data, because no worker will stop while in the middle of processing a job. And that's it. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something. If you haven't done that already, make sure to subscribe to the channel in order for you to be notified whenever we post any new content. Thank you, have a great day, happy coding, and see you later.